Today we're going to learn about determining the end behavior of functions. Let's say we have a problem like this. Determine the end behavior of A, this graph, B, this graph, and C, this graph. So when we determine the end behavior of functions, we first have, as x goes to infinity, y goes to, and then we have to figure out whether y goes to infinity or does y go to negative infinity. So as x goes to infinity, that means as x travels farther and farther this way, we know that on graph A, y travels farther and farther this way, which is infinity. Oops. So as x travels to infinity, y travels to infinity. The next part is as x goes closer to negative infinity, y goes closer to, now we have to figure out that as x moves farther and farther this way, does y move farther this way, farther up, or farther down? So here we can see that y moves up, so closer to infinity. So the answer to problem A is as x goes closer to infinity, y also goes closer to infinity, and as x goes closer to negative infinity, y goes closer to infinity. Now let's move on to problem B. In problem B, here we have a graph that has lots of ups and downs, as we can see. But we still have the same form. So as x goes into infinity, y goes to, so here y goes to infinity, because even though, let's say here when x goes closer to infinity, we can see that it's going down. But in the end, we can see this little arrow here showing that it's just going to keep going up as x goes closer to infinity. So y goes closer to infinity also. As x goes closer to negative infinity, y goes closer to, so here, even though we had this little bump here, as x goes closer to negative infinity, we can see that y eventually starts to go down. So y is going closer to negative infinity. So, the answer to problem B is as x goes closer to infinity, y also goes closer to infinity, and as x goes closer to negative infinity, y also goes closer to negative infinity. So now let's move on to problem C. In problem C, as x goes closer to infinity, y eventually goes closer to infinity also. And as x goes closer to negative infinity, y also goes closer to negative infinity, as we can see.